Okay, so we're gonna start. Ed. Okay, so welcome. Thanks for being here today. This is a panel entitled Diversity and Gender Equality in AI Pathways to Address Systemic Changes. So my name is Catherine Regis. I'm a professor of law at the University of Montreal. I'm an associate academic member at MILA, and I'm the co-chair of the Responsible AI group. So today we have a fantastic lineup of speakers. I'm very excited about this panel today. So first, we're gonna have Paula Ricorte. She's a professor, associate professor at the Tecnológico de Monterrey. Sorry for my Spanish accent, lack of, from Mexico. We also have Eliane Ubali-Joro. She's the executive director of an organization called Sustainability in the Digital Age and Future Earth from Canada. And we have on my right-hand side, Benjamin Prudhomme. He's the executive director of AI for Humanity from MILA. And also, last but not least, we have Alison O'Byrne. She's the acting director of the AI Hub from the ISA department, which stands for Innovation, Science and Economic Development of the Government of Canada. And first, some opening remarks from Paula. Paula, please.
Hi, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Do you see my screen?
Yes, but it's not in a diagram mode. Not diagram, but diaporama. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, good morning for you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to be very brief. I'm just going to share some ideas and provocations. My name is Paula Ricaurte, and I'm also a member of the GPAI group of experts. So I'm going to just go over three ideas, and I'm going to first begin with a general idea about diversity and gender equality in AI, trends and gaps, and then diversity and gender equality at GPAI. And at the end, I'm going to share the proposal that we have at the working group, Pathways to Address Systemic Changes. So, well, we all know that there is a growing interest in diversity and gender equality in AI. We have seen many initiatives over the past few years from UNESCO, the OECD, the International Development Bank, and also ideas that are trying to address, for example, this innovation divide that, of course, we know exists. For example, this recent initiative from the Inter-American Development Bank, it's a Gender and Artificial Intelligence Challenge. And there are other initiatives coming from social civic society, from NGOs in different parts of the world that are also trying to address specifically gender and race divide in particular. So we have all these initiatives and all these debates around the world, but this doesn't mean that the rules of the game have changed. So we, of course, we know what happened with Timnit Gebru at Google. We also know that AI is taking over jobs, especially jobs of women workers. And we also know that there is a huge gap in the sector in general, working on artificial intelligence. Women are working in artificial intelligence, and in particular, for example, data and AI, cloud computing. And we also know that the digital economy is generating a huge divide among countries, among regions. For example, we see here the main actors in America and in Asia, a little bit less, of course, in Europe. But for example, we don't see here Africa with only one actor, and then Latin America is just diluted. And developing countries remain providers of raw data. We still are not players of this game. So what's missing, and of course this is not a comprehensive list at all, and I think that there is missing a lot of things. A structural change, considering AI as a matter of power, not only as a matter of a simple technology. AI as a source of interconnected inequalities, and here we are trying to develop an intersectional approach, and also I would say a decolonial approach, because we are also trying to emphasize that there is a regional world gap between countries that are developers of AI and those who are just users or consumers of AI. A holistic approach, not only considering bias, algorithmic bias, for example, but considering the full AI life cycle. A multi-scale perspective, taking also into account that there are players with varying levels of agency and interest, and also short, medium, and long-term goals. So at the GPAI, we all know there are only a small group of countries that are participating. We only have 25 members. And for example, we know that Africa is not considered, and from Latin America, we only have Brazil and Mexico participating. So there's this first lack of representation at the council. Also, if we see the leadership team, we see this lack of representation that is also being reproduced at the leadership member. So we have these 4 groups, but over the past 2 years, the issue of diversity, gender equality, and inclusion has been absent. The GPAI is unfortunately noticed at the international level for being absent in the conversations about gender diversity. So we, as a group, we tried to develop a project proposal to address systemic change, and considering these different scales. Of course, we have the nation states, we have the global discussion, but we also have institutions like or organizations or international organizations that are part of this multi-scale approach. So we have the GPAI among these, let's say, levels. So our project, it's called Towards Real Diversity and Gender Equality in Artificial Intelligence, and it will try to provide evidence-based promising practices and recommendations for the GPAI. So this is the main goal, to provide the AI ecosystem, in particular the member states of the GPAI, with a framework including concrete tools and recommendations to ensure diversity and gender equality throughout the AI cycle, based on existing guidelines, good local practices from around the world, international human rights, and gender equality standards. So we are trying to propose an intersectional agenda, considering like these intersecting identities of race, gender, class, ability, language, but also geographical differences, cultural differences. And of course, at the end, we would like to change the rules of the game. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paula. So a lot of interesting points. I'm sure we'll have some further discussion on these. For the next part, I would like to invite the other 3 panelists to just, as a warm-up question, to just speak for a couple of minutes about why this topic is important for them, and also why the topic is important more generally and that we should care about it. So I don't know, Iliad, if you want to start.
Okay, for some reason I didn't hear the beginning of the question. If you could just repeat it again, please.
Yes, sure. Okay, so why this topic is important for you and why you think we should care about it more broadly in the GPAI, but at all other levels. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So why we should all care, if we think about it, there are 13 companies in the world. There are digital companies that are making annual revenues that are higher than 85 countries in the world. So we know that the digital age is a critical provider of wealth, and that wealth is not distributed. Paula's picture around, who are the players globally shows that clearly. And so we know that that's going to be amplified as the digital age really centers around artificial intelligence and how we use artificial intelligence. And so what we know is access to artificial intelligence is going to be critical in terms of who has the capacity to use the existing data in the world and get insights from that data and be able to turn those insights into products and services that will build prosperity. And so who will benefit from this prosperity? So how we look at AI in the world today is really critical to how are we creating equity for all in the future in the digital age, and is really critical in terms of who are the solution makers that are going to harness artificial intelligence in terms of the challenges we're facing in the 21st century. And so those, I'll just stop there. I could go on.
Thank you. Alison?
Certainly. So I, in terms of my kind of interest in the subject, I come from a background of working in open government, so in openness, transparency, open data, issues like that. And it was how I kind of came into artificial intelligence issues in policy. I think that the link then to sort of gender equality and to diversity is pretty strong, in the sense that just as Ariane just said, the question becomes, who has access to this data and who has access to these resources? We talk so much in the way that we justify the work that we do on AI and how exciting AI is. We talk so much about the potential benefits and the transformative power of artificial intelligence, and it's really exciting, but it's also a little frightening or a little bit concerning for anyone who doesn't kind of come from a majority group, or who comes from a group that is not the majority, or is not the is not the dominant group, as it were. Because what it means is that when there's new opportunities to be seized, you always end up asking the question, who is going to be able to take advantage of these opportunities, and who is going to be the person who is at the table and able to shape what this does for our society? I think for me, the questions around artificial intelligence and gender equality and diversity really come back to sort of two different pieces, the sort of defensive and offensive, or the defensive and the beneficial. When we talk about the fact that AI is going to make work more efficient, is going to make things easier, is going to make decisions faster, who is going to benefit from that? So is it going to be people who represent the majority of cases that are coming before an AI system, who represent the normal case study? Or is it, and then what happens to the people who have more complicated issues, or who, don't fit easily into an automated decision-making system, and whose identities aren't reflected in automated decision-making systems? Does that mean that they're not going to be able to access the same benefits as other people? And then, of course, coming from the government world, there's a sort of defensive issue as well, where if we're not considering issues of gender equality and diversity when we're building AI products and when we're building services, there will be instances in which people are interacting with AI services or AI systems that really don't have a choice but to interact with them. Unless we build in, possibilities for people to be able to kind of appeal to a human or have a human in the loop in decision-making processes, a lot of the time we're talking in government services, at least, about services that people need to be able to access: employment insurance, health benefits. These aren't optional pieces. It's not like joining a social network. You have to be able to get access to these services. And if we're not doing that in a way that's recognizing of the diversity of the populations that we're serving, then we're not doing it at all, to be honest. And so that's kind of where I come from, especially in this government space, of really making sure that the benefits are drawn by all, but also making sure that the potential drawbacks aren't really felt disproportionately by minority groups.
You want me to go directly? So I think there's many layers in a way to answering this question. For me, the first one is, and it's really building upon what Paula said, but if we look at AI not so much as just a technology, where we'd assume neutrality, which frankly I think is just wrong. So if we look at AI as a source of power, then it really becomes essential that we ask who has that power, how is it shared, is it even shared? And are we in a way seeing in the way that we're developing AI governance and structures really a replication of some of the biggest mistakes we've been making for, I was going to say decades, but frankly, centuries or perhaps millennials. So I think first, it's a great opportunity. Like power is reshaping itself in front of our eyes, and we can either, seize that opportunity and address it, or we can let it go and have those, very sad conversations again in decades from now. And I think that would be a tremendous missed opportunity. The second layer for me, and why I'm excited to talk about it here, is that I think that there's a need to shift the conversation from just a statement of fact, like there isn't enough women and diversity in the room, to action. So in a way, my hope for this panel is that we don't waste time saying, oh, is it a problem that women are not represented? It is a problem. If AI is a source of power, then the people shaping it should be representative. And frankly, it's a problem from a standpoint of the quality of the products that are being developed. Like, we should actually be aiming to represent everybody. It's also just a fundamental problem in terms of social justice. And I think that too few people say that. Like, it feels like we need to justify, it's a problem no, it's a problem from a human rights and social justice perspective. And so I'm hoping that, I have fantastic co-panelists, so I'm hoping that we can dive into, if that, statement of fact is taken for granted, then where does it take us in terms of a conversation? And the two last points is the first thing, as a gay male and human rights activist, I feel a sense of solidarity and of privilege to be part of that conversation. But then as a man, I feel like it's important to show up on those panels and to show up with the right posture, to make sure that the right people are around the table, to make sure that we listen and to make sure that we enable. And the last piece that I do want to name, and it's not to create discomfort, but I think it's to create awareness, is this session is actually happening at the same time as the GPAI Council is happening. And I don't mean that to say that there's intention there. I really don't think that there's intention for all the decision-making people not to be in the room. But I want to suggest that there's a lack of attention. This is the session that has been scheduled when the people who make decisions are absent. And I think it's important to name it, because this is when those conversations happen, and we need those people to be in the room. We need those people to engage on those topics, because in 20 years from now, it's too late. And governance matters, and commercialization matters, and so does equality and equity. And so I'm very grateful that I have my panelists, and I wish that this happened at a different moment. But I'm hoping that the session is recorded and we can hear all your thoughts, and then that people are going to join later.
Thank you very much to you all. I think that's a very good start. Talking about human rights is essential for this issue, so you all brought that topic up from different perspectives. So now it's interesting because you're all coming from different organizations, so it's going to be interesting to explore a bit more with you how this can materialize in your institutions, the issues about gender equality and diversity. So that's my next question. How the current challenges regarding gender equality and diversity really take shape at different levels, so the international level, the national level, and the regional level. So I would like to hear more about that from your perspective, but also from your organization. How do you think these challenges really take shape in your own institution? So I will start with you, Benjamin.
Thank you. I just said that I wanted to listen, and then I speak twice in a row, but it's fine. So I work in an academic institution at MILA, the Quebec AI Institute. So the first reason why that matters at the academic level is that, frankly, that's where we train people. And so if we want skilled people to participate in shaping the ecosystem, then hopefully they need to get through academia, and we need to create conditions whereby people are welcomed. So you bring in talent, but also you keep talent. And so some of the things that some of the ways in which we've been approaching that work, the first thing is really having a strong EDI framework, equity, diversity, and inclusion framework. In a way, that the idea that captures it for us is EDI by design. So that idea that you're not punting that responsibility to one person who's your EDI, consultant, but rather really make that a problem or an issue that lies really with the CEO and with transversal management, so that everybody's accountable for it, and everybody accounts for it as we're building, the strategies and the policies, and really follow the money in a way, like where does your money go?
Do you have a concrete example of how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first way of when I say like parking it, so one example would be to say, what's the data that we have on EDI, and can we make bursaries to have more women in academia? And if you want, and then you say, oh, EDI consultant, think about this and make me, give me a recommendation. Another way that I think is more impactful to think about it is to say every single big program that our institution makes or creates, whether it's EDI related or not. And so really to be structural. So if I'm creating a $50 million program to invest in fundamental research, then I want to make sure that that program is structured in a way whereby 50% of the people receiving the money are going to be women, and that I'm sure that I'm reaching the 50-30, so that at least 30% of the people are going to be coming from marginalized communities of the ecosystem. And you really create, frankly, you create evaluation mechanisms that reflect that. And so the idea is to have it shift from just an EDI focus to everything you're doing, looking at EDI as one of the core component of how you architect a program. And so it's not because you do fundamental research in deep learning that it isn't equally important to have 50% women there than it is important to have 50% women in fairness and AI. Like the presence of women or the presence of diversity shouldn't be kind of, essential just on the topic of fairness, but really you should be giving that, really it should be a blanket attitude in a way in shaping the ecosystem. So that's how we've come about it, and we've come about it to think about it on three folds, if you will. Talent, so at the individual level, and there it's just not a question of just giving money, it's a question of like making sure that you create space for the talent, that you recruit them, and that you bring them in, and that you create a space that's fair and inclusive.
And you put people in leadership position as well.
Exactly, you elevate. Like for us, like there's three words. You elevate, you support, and you draw lines. So when lines are being, overpassed, you step in and you say you've overpassed the line, and you need to either, remove yourself from the project or bring in different voices. But I think you really need to elevate in positions of promotion. When you're in a leadership position, you need to support, you need to create space, you need to remunerate, and then you need to draw lines.
And I often say that universities are still one of the most trusted institutions we have today. So we have to be worthy of that trust and really make room for women as well, so they feel that they can trust that institution. And also universities provide a very unique opportunity. I often say that they have kind of a rendezvous with the future leaders. So it's a really good opportunity when you have all these people coming and wanting to learn and studying different disciplines, to teach them and really help them to embed some of these values when they work. So I think it's a good institution for that. Who wants to go next? May I just go reverse order? So Ali, you want to go?
I'd be happy to. Yeah, I think that the perspective that we bring is obviously quite different from the one that Benjamin just spoke about, just because like it's a very different nature of work. So coming from the federal government side, as I sort of alluded to in my opening remarks, I think that there's a piece that becomes less about, who are we training and who are we including, and more about who could we potentially be excluding and how do we avoid that. Within that, I think there's sort of two different pieces from the government of Canada, at least, that point to kind of broader obligations that are on governments that are working on artificial intelligence policies, programs, initiatives. There's the piece that comes at the national level, at the federal level, and then there's the piece that comes at the international level as well. Within Canada, we've taken a particularly sort of technology neutral approach to date. And so the thinking is, Canada has human rights legislation and Canada has privacy legislation, and those things apply to AI the same way that they apply to any other kind of technology, and that the sort of relevant regulations kind of flow from that. And it's only relatively recently that Canada has started taking a slightly different approach and focusing more on a regulatory side or on a legal side that's dedicated specifically on the artificial intelligence piece. And that's with the introduction of a new piece of legislation in Canada that's been introduced to Parliament. So it hasn't passed yet. It's not law yet. But Bill C-27, the Digital Charter Implementation Act 2022, of course, includes the AI and Data Act. The AI and Data Act really specifically starts to get to the heart of some of these issues. Its kind of fundamental goal is about building Canadians' trust in AI and protecting Canadians from potential harms from artificial intelligence. And wrapped up within that, it's really focused on the specific requirements that will relate to high impact AI systems. That is, AI systems that can have a particularly significant impact on individuals or on environments, and recognizing that a lot of that stems from systemic harms or biases that can be present in AI systems. And so I think from a national level perspective, we're not alone in this. There are a number of other countries that are also proposing legislation or going down the road of specific laws or specific regulations. If you look at the EU AI Act, the EU's Council of Europe, if you look at the United States, just put out a roadmap for a Bill of Rights on AI. There's a lot of different folks who are taking an increasingly legal and regulatory approach here. Obviously, that can't be done in isolation from other approaches. You can't just pass a law and say, we've solved bias, it's done now, finally. But I think that there is an extent to which countries are increasingly seeing that it kind of can't be done without some form of regulatory approach or some form of as I say, a defensive approach on AI, which is that there needs to be a level of legal or regulatory protection of individuals on the basis of sort of protected areas. So that's the kind of national approach on harm reduction or on recognition of the potential impacts of AI and of trying to address those biases throughout the AI lifecycle, from development to creation to implementation. And then at the international level, of course, Canada's also been very active in the global community talking about artificial intelligence. I think we've got hopefully pretty good credentials on responsible AI, and all thanks to the researchers who work here in Canada, if I'm being honest. Some of the early leaders in artificial intelligence were also some of the earliest voices talking about issues of responsible AI. And so we're very fortunate to continue work with those partners, including partners from Mila here in Canada. But at the international level, I think that there was a sort of desire as well to bring together this community of like-minded partners that has become the Global Partnership on AI, specifically with a view to trying to encourage responsible, ethical development and adoption of artificial intelligence. And so I think part of the goal of GPAI, like particularly for me, but I think also for the other Canadians and the other countries that are involved, part of the goal of GPAI is really looking at those questions of harnessing the benefits of artificial intelligence in a way that benefits everyone, and mitigating the harms of artificial intelligence in a way that recognizes that there are some people, some identities, some groups that are more likely to be harmed by it than others. I think that the example, I can't remember whether it was Paula or Eliana who pointed to it earlier, this example of women, I think it was Paula during your presentation, women working in jobs that are most likely to be automated. That fact is in and of itself a sort of potential benefit and a potential harm. If there are women who are being kind of increasingly put out of work by the automation of tasks that they would otherwise have been paid to do and not being able to reskill or to find jobs in other parts of the economy, it's an enormous problem, a huge problem, and another place where we're seeing a kind of unequal application of the drawbacks, potential drawbacks of artificial intelligence. But by the same token, if women are doing jobs that are really like easily automated or that could be done more efficiently using artificial intelligence, wouldn't it be nice for women to be working in industries where work could become easier, where they could approach new challenges or new ideas, or have a more space to do more kind of thought-based work if there are pieces that can be easily automated? What an exciting potential opportunity, and what a devastating challenge, depending on how we create the policies that sort of frame around that, and depending on how we apply the systems that could potentially make these changes. And so I think that really that regulatory approach at the domestic level, combined with this international community that's focused on those kind of underlying values of human rights, of benefit to all from artificial intelligence, is really where countries are going to find their roadmap to success in responsible AI. And the other thing that I should say before I stop and turn over to the other panelists is that the global partnerships strength lies not only in bringing together this community of like-minded partners, but also in allowing us to bring together some of the world leading experts in AI so that governments can hear from them as well, can hear what the recommendations are from those experts who don't work inside government, who are outside and who understand the latest developments in the technology, who understand the latest trends, and are able to explain to governments where our efforts could best be spent, what we need to do in order to have responsible AI, and maybe what biases we don't understand or can't understand from sort of internally. There's the very, very true phrase that you don't know what you don't know. And so if you're not talking to the right stakeholders and you're not hearing from the right people, and if you're not even hearing from external experts, there's no way for government to understand or to recognize the potential harms or the potential benefits that we can capture or avoid with artificial intelligence without doing that connection beyond our kind of walls. And so I think GPAI provides an excellent space for that because it allows us, for Canada, for example, to even move to listen to experts that are sort of beyond our national context, and which really gives us a stronger view of the global AI ecosystem.
Thank you very much, Alison. So you touched a little bit on that, but can you give a concrete example of how a country can play a leadership role in the international level and bringing up this issue and really moving forward?
Absolutely. I think there's a few different ways that you can do it. I mean, we've had, I won't be shy about expressing gratitude to some GPAI countries that have already provided direct funding support to projects that are going on in GPAI, focused on different aspects of AI. I mean, the potential for a country to provide a funding partnership, for example, or a funding support to the GPAI project on gender diversity would be very, very exciting as one way governments can kind of contribute directly to the research that's going on in this field. I think that there are other ways that governments can do this too, or to kind of demonstrate that leadership at the international level. One way is by developing policies or laws in the domestic context that can then be shared or scaled up to other countries. So if there's a particular success that you've had or a use case that you know of that you as a government have kind of undertaken that you can then share internationally, it can be quite helpful. I mean, I hate to brag or to toot our own horn, but Canada's directive on automated decision making is a useful example here. The directive that was developed by our colleagues at the Treasury Board Secretariat governs the use of artificial intelligence within the federal government. And we know that it's been used as an example by other countries as they've developed similar kind of frameworks for the use of AI by government. So even sharing information or sharing knowledge around how to develop those policies can be a form of international leadership. But likewise, in GPAI, listening to the experts that we have is a form of international leadership too. So as we come together and as we hear the recommendations coming from the MEG report, as we hear the recommendations that are going to be coming out of this new GPAI project, to take those back to the relevant authorities within our countries and to think about what does this look like in practice? How can we find the funding to support making actual changes to policy? And how can we find the sort of political will to make the actual changes to policy that will implement what we're hearing from experts will be the next steps towards responsible AI?
Thank you, Alison. Just before moving to Eliane, I just want to mention that people who are participating virtually, you can ask your question in the Q&A function, and we're going to take them later, but just feel free to add your question right away. Eliane.
So I was thinking, I think the reality is you can have the greatest policies, but if you have not created the pipeline for girls and women to come through mathematics and computer science programs, you're not going to get the gender dimension. If marginalized communities are failing in math and computer science because they don't have access to internet at home, because they aren't able to learn how to program because their schools aren't offering those possibilities, those are going to create barriers of entry. And so part of it is, how do we ensure that there is equitable access to learning so that you can eventually contribute and so you can eventually shape and lead in the space? So I think it's really important that we think about our education systems and how our education systems are encouraging women and marginalized communities to take part in STEM curriculum, at all levels, from 3 years old onwards, so I really take this very seriously. And also, who are the leaders in this space? And so when I was listening to Alison speak, I'm from Rwanda, I was thinking, our minister of ICT in Rwanda is an MIT trained woman. Our director of the Fourth Industrial Revolution Institute that's related to the World Economic Forum is a woman. The programs at Carnegie Mellon Africa campus have a minimum of 30% women in their cohorts, as well as the African Institutes of Mathematical Sciences. And we have been working with AI fellows from the Leaper Labs program, and as well, they're aiming to get a minimum of 50%, if not 80% women in their programs. So you really have to ask yourself, how do I make this visible, and how do I move this forward? And so I think it's really, really important to think about how we're really looking at the system and dismantling the power dynamics that create systemic barriers for entry. And also, how do we create enabling safe environments for failing forward and learning, and knowing that, maybe nobody looks like you in the room, but you have a right to have a seat at the table, and to have your voice heard, and to have your voice presented and contribute to the conversation, that it must be part of the conversation. And the reality is, what we know is that 90% of AI projects that fail, it's because they're not context located. And so part of it is we realize the importance of how are we localizing AI in terms of the communities that we want most benefit the projects we're working on. And so this is a really critical element that we really have to think about, is in order to ensure that AI benefits all, we have to make it possible for all to participate at all levels of education, all levels of research, all levels of investment. We know that in general, in investment, startup space, women get less than 10% of funding. And so, things get worse the more of a technical background is needed to move forward, just because of the numbers of who's there, and then the audacity you have to say, I'm going to move forward and, get my company financed. And so we really need to work at all levels of power and hierarchy to dismantle the systems, to really make it not only more inclusive, but also more productive for humanity and for the planet.
Thank you very much, Eliane. So you mentioned something, a lot of things that are important, but you mentioned that we should have, for instance, more women in STEMs. But how do we do that, right? So we often say that we should have more women, but then we have to do it, and it's difficult to achieve our objective. Or sometimes women go in the STEMs and then they leave the field because they don't have any mentors or people that can really support them throughout their journey. So do you have any specific strategy, or a good example?
Absolutely.
Good.
So I'm a trainer for the organization for women scientists in developing countries. So I give a lot of leadership and coaching programming that I offer for the organization in support of women scientists. I also, as a mother, I encourage all parents to take the Harvard gender bias test to understand how are they raising their children in ways that are encouraging boys to fail forward and girls to be safe, so not go into the hard work of science and the difficulties. And also, be aware. I remember when my daughter was 7, she went to a robotics camp, and some boys told her and her best friend, you should not be here. And so part of it is realizing that it starts really early, and to pay attention. And so that's whether, you're a parent, you're an auntie, you're an uncle, you're a friend. It's really realizing that there are constant barriers that can stay invisible. And I remember in the case of my daughter and her best friend, it took them 3 days to actually tell me and my daughter's friend's mother, that they were being bullied really in their science camp. And so part of it is, how do we make it safe for people who are being marginalized to speak up? And so this, and as I said, it happens really early. And so I remember, for me in primary school, I would go and tell my daughter's math teacher, I said, she sees you a certain way. You're a big, tall man. She's a little girl. And so you have to realize that sometimes she'll have issues and she'll feel unsafe. Anyway, she's great. She graduated high school, science honors, is in university and doing great. But really the idea is how do we allow failing forward, and how do we pay attention? How do we pay attention to all the girls or marginalized youth that were around, and ask them, how are you feeling? How safe are you feeling in this environment to explore these fields? And so I think those are important issues. And then, when they get to university and further, having those role models is great, but you don't necessarily have them. So part of it is also, how do you make yourself your own role model? How do you envision that? How do you encourage mentorship across gender, across diversity, to really ensure that, we're bringing forward those different voices? And, I love that this panel has so many women. Part of it, there's the issue of manels, and that people consciously don't think, oh, well, who is the woman I can nominate for this prize, for this panel? And I recently heard of something called the Matilda effect, which is this idea that women scientists over time are forgotten, but their male peers are remembered. And so part of it is, how do we watch out for that? And there's another phenomenon called the Matthew effect that says the people who win prizes and then win more prizes. So part of it is, how do we encourage marginalized communities to be those prize winners? And the other thing I also just want to mention is how do we explore what is happening at the margins? And so for me, like, I have Indigenous colleagues that worked on the Indigenous Artificial Intelligence Protocol. So how do we bring different value system worldviews, and how we're actually creating and using artificial intelligence is really important.
That's great. Thank you very much, Eliane. Paula.
Oh, well, this conversation is amazing. Of course, we can go for hours speaking about these issues. And I would really would like to go back to some of the previous comments and go back to the idea that, again, AI is a source of power, as Benjamin said, and also what Eliane was saying about addressing these structural divides. And for me, it's important to consider those scales, those layers, those levels. Thinking, for example, about that girl who is being excluded, like it's part of the micro-political level, but also how these geopolitical decisions are affecting specific lives of children and people. So I would like to, I recently wrote a paper about AI becoming not only we know this extreme source of power, but also becoming this tool to reproduce this type of violence that is cultural, is epistemic, is gender, is race, is like, and it has a different nature, like from previous times of history. It's the kind of different form of power. So for us, people who live in countries that are not rich or do not have a developed AI industry, for us it's very important to let like decision makers know that we are not going to allow to continue this this form of increasing these asymmetries of power globally, because we don't want to be again those who provide our cheap labor, our natural resources, our, I don't know, raw data, or we don't want to be consumers or users of AI. We want to participate, but of course, if we want to participate, we need to think about those changes, like in short, medium, and long-term changes, because asymmetries are very deep. So for me, I mean, I would love to on how can we consider those micro politics and also with the geopolitics in mind.
And thank you, Paula. And you brought the topic, well, we spoke about that before, but of asymmetries and power, and these are essential in the conversation, and that's directly related to the next question I would like to ask you. And that's something that's really important to me. So I often realize that we think about gender equality and diversity, and we say we just add, a woman on a panel, like you mentioned, and it will be fine, right? To someone from the Global South. But then I realized that it's, of course, really important to have these voices on projects, on panels, but often the power dynamics kind of continue in those groups. So it's half of the battle, right? We have to do more than that. So I would like to ask you about this. So how can we overcome, at least partially, the power dynamics in the multi-stakeholder project to make sure that women and people from marginalized or less represented groups have a real and not an apparent voice and influence? I would like to hear you about that. I know it's a tough question, but we're here for that.
It's a tough question. Of course, we proposed this project because we want to have those answers as well. And I would go back to one comment from Eliane recently. She said that of course we want to distribute the benefits of AI for all. We all want to be included, but for me, one more question that needs to be addressed in this type of organizations and forum, who is bearing the cost of AI development? Not only what are the harms of the use of AI, like in the wild, but who is bearing the cost? I mean, which communities, which territories are being affected? That's also part of the discussion. And then in these events or these organizations, as Benjamin said, we need to speak up. We need to make sure that we do not naturalize or normalize that there are no women, that there are only industrialized countries at the governance level. There are only the same people or the same companies or the same countries considered for making decisions or for the develop AI in general. So I would say that first we need to make sure to not move these problems in every space, in every organization. And then we need to make sure that we design a policy and an action plan that can address those problems, those symmetries.
Thank you, Paul. I just want to mention that your connection is sometimes not working, but we still get a general idea of what you are saying. Alison, do you want to say something about that from a government perspective? How can we?
I feel like our other panelists will have much more interesting things to say on this than I do. But I would go back perhaps to some of the things that particularly Eliane has pointed to previously. And indeed what Paula was just talking about as well, which is that I think what is really required is an ability for, and not just an ability for, but space for folks from different communities, folks with intersectional identities, folks representing different points of view, different lifestyles, different ways of being, different lived experiences, to be at the table in every conversation that's going on. In our context on AI policy development, but on AI policy and in other contexts, maybe on actual like research and development. I think that what's crucial is to make space and to make places for those voices. But as Eliane was saying earlier, that's not helpful if there's no training that underlies it. If there's no women who are able to access STEM and no women who are able to access that education, if they're not being pointed in the direction of you could be a leader in artificial intelligence, then they're not going to be at the table because there's not going to be an ability for them to do that. I think that a non-zero amount of this comes down to money and comes down to finding investment programs, finding granting programs, whether if it's government or finding venture capital investment programs, if it's outside government, that will support women, support folks coming from minority communities to ensure that it's not just the same types of people who are always receiving the same kind of funding, because there are other experiences and there are other approaches to AI that need to be recognized and that need to be able to have a voice within the ecosystem. And the other thing that I would say is that part of it is really a shift in the attitude that we take, so that when we develop AI policies or when we are, in other aspects of the AI ecosystem, and someone comes and says, as a woman, I'm not being heard in this conversation, to have a reaction of, okay, and how do we fix that? Let's rethink, let's move back, let's take additional steps, instead of having an attitude of, yeah, well, I know, but we did our best. And so I think that kind of engagement with stakeholders and that level of openness and that recognition that we will have to iterate on these pieces and that we will have to go back and change approaches based on other voices that we didn't hear from the first time, or are bringing more people into the conversation, is going to be essential as well. And we're kind of running down two tracks at the same time, where we have this sort of male-dominated group of folks who are already working in the AI world, and we want to train up as many young women as we can into STEM, but at the same time we have the AI community that we have, and we also need to make space for women in that community, not 20 years down the line once we have a 50-50 split of folks in the comp sci departments. So I think that there's quite a lot of different pieces to it, but one of the most significant pieces will really be like listening and engagement. I know, for example, that our team is working through the Government of Canada Advisory Council on Artificial Intelligence, who had done some work around public awareness back in 2021, going out and doing outreach to Canadians, talking about sentiments and talking about understanding of knowledge of artificial intelligence. And we did that work and kind of, did those workshops and got to the end of it. And there was a recognition of like, oh, there wasn't really any targeted engagement with Indigenous communities in Canada, for example. And so we've gone back and we're doing a sort of additional phase of the work to make a more targeted effort to go out and talk to Indigenous folks in Canada about what they know about and what they understand about artificial intelligence. Because when you recognize those gaps, to say to yourself, well, we didn't do it right the first time, we got to do something better next time. We got to bring those voices into the conversation. It's just recognizing that iterative approach is going to have to be the way that we kind of look at artificial intelligence, because with this evolving technology, the more we're going to learn, the more voices we're going to have to hear from to really integrate them into this conversation.
You want to add something, Eliane, on this?
I think one of the basic things that I really urgently would like to see is greater literacy around equity, inclusion, and diversity for people who are in the majority groups. Because part of it is that, the need to go back is because at the beginning, there was just not enough literacy to understand how critical bringing those voices to the table is important. And so, when you're in situation of privilege, you have blinders. And so part of taking those blinders off is increasing your literacy and not depending on marginalized people to educate you, but to really create a system where the literacy of the majority in EDI is really strengthened, so that we don't have those issues of, oh, who got forgotten again.
Thank you, Eliane, and I really like this idea. I think it's fantastic. And how would you do that concretely? I always go with the concrete with you.
Yes.
I think you have a lot of experience with this. Like you're in a group. How would you do that?
So I'm on the board of Genome Canada, and Genome Canada has a phenomenal program related to. They have an amazing director of inclusion, diversity, and equity. And so, as a board, we received, strategy sessions on EDI. We went through an experiential, embodied enactment of what it is to be Indigenous in Canada and live through, 400 years of colonization and what that actually feels like in body. And these were exercises that, took, an hour or two. And so part of it is, how are organizations embedding inclusion and diversity in leadership? So because if you start on your board, everybody within the system is going to get there. So part of it is, how do we prioritize EDI in our work? How do we prioritize in our governance? And then how do we embed it and the whole organization. And so I think those are really critical elements that bring amazing new dimensions to any work in the STEM field, in particular where we know that the gaps are greater.
So we already have one of our recommendation for this project at the GPAI. Benjamin, you want to go next?
Sure, thank you. First, I just want to highlight how insightful some of the things all of my three fellow panelists just said. I love the idea, Eliane, that you're of failing forward. I think when you're part of leadership and when you're part of majority groups, there's this sense of, how do I embark in that conversation and not make mistakes? And in fact, it's fine to make mistakes. It's not fine to disengage. So I love that idea of failing forward, but doing that in a way that's constructive and in a way that, brings in voices and whereby your posture is kind of listening and learning. And then to kind of take your question really from the perspective of like when you're leading a project, what do you concretely do? I think we still need to learn, but I think there's things we know. And it really starts from the project that you actually choose to work on. So the first thing is what projects, if you're in a position of leadership, I have the great privilege of leading a team that does applied AI for good and that does AI policy and governance. What are the projects that you're going to choose to work on? Are you going to choose to work on, I have a project with Eliane and her team on regenerative agriculture in Rwanda. Is that where you'll spend your time and your money? So first, what projects do you want to do? Second, within those projects, whose perspective are you going to be serving or whose interest are you going to be serving? And so if you work on human trafficking or, on different projects, are you going to go talk to the sex worker community or the human trafficking survivors and try to understand how AI could support their needs? Or are you going to talk to another stakeholder and really, build that project on those needs? So really kind of what community are you trying to build a system for? The third piece is once the project is on, there's this great book on participatory design from Sasha Costanza-Choc. So, how do you bring in whatever community that your system will be affecting, how do you bring them in, not just as user, but in fact as participatory designers of your project? And there's really creative ways to do that. Sometimes, sometimes within those communities, there actually is AI bandwidth, and then you want to make sure that those people are in your project as AI design, AI design leaders. But sometimes that doesn't happen. You still need to get your data annotated. Perhaps that community can help you there. You still need to get people on the board or on the advisory board to understand that's another space where you can have them. So you really need to think about your project 360 and make sure that those communities are really involved in it in a meaningful way, which can include difficult conversations. It can mean that at different point in time, you're going to have to let go of certain ambitions you had for the project because they don't serve that community. And so, again, failing forward, being humble in those conversations. And then I think, the last things you can do. The first thing is you need to elevate. You need to make sure that that women and people from diversity are offered positions of power. In a completely different space, but I've been listening a lot to Viola Davis' speeches recently, and I just find her phenomenal. And she won an Emmy, and she said, I simply cannot win an Emmy for a role that is not offered to me. And that's just so true in AI. Like, you can't be the person who wins the Turing Award if you're not provided with a research chair and the funds to advance your idea. So elevate people, support people, and that can be done very concretely in a project. Seek voices. People from marginalized groups are not going to speak as loud at the table. So make sure that you're not satisfied with silence. Let's make sure that you create the space. Make sure that you're willing to have difficult conversations. You might have some members of the majority that don't react well, and your role in leadership is to kind of take them aside and have a difficult chat in terms of what the values are in the project. Create the material conditions for minorities to join. Like, stop giving free internships. Like, that's just not fair. Make sure that people who, even if they're not supporting the AI bandwidth, they might be doing data annotation that has value. Pay that fairly. and then the last thing is, walk the talk and draw lines. And Eliane was saying earlier, there's this things, there's the manels things, right? The panels where there's only men. Just say no. I say no. Like if I'm invited to a panel with, only white males, I say, look, I would be delighted. The topic is great. Either you change your panel or you find someone else. And so there has to be moments where you kind of you think of the collective and then you say, I need to make decisions accordingly. And those decisions, they're value-based. So those are like my concrete examples of how, when you're in a position of leadership, can you provide those spaces. And again, I'd actually be delighted to hear about other experiences, opportunities of doing that concretely. But those are some of the ways that I think are impactful.
Anyone wants to react to that? It's fine. Okay. Thank you, Benjamin. I really liked the. Oh, Eliane, you want to say something?
Well, I just wanted to say, for example, for me, like I've been doing global work for many decades, and in the last 2 years, I've been doing a lot of Canada-focused work. And so part of my initial priority was, how do I build trust with Indigenous experts so that they want to work with me? And it took a year to build that trust. And now, projects and ideas and, we're moving forward with things. But, I had to give myself that time to build trust, and I had to prioritize it on day one. And so part of it is also, how do you create those links across diverse, points of views and visions and way forwards? And how do you ensure that you're working actively to say, well, I am actively looking to increase the diversity of the people I'm working with. And it takes time. And that time that may be taken away from, writing proposals that bring in funding. It may be saying, I'm going to build a relationship and, and the funding will come later. So part of it is you really have to work, as Benjamin is saying, from a values-based space of what really matters and how do you align purpose with the work.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to kind of another topic. It's related to the big topic. Let's talk about intersectorial approach, which is important for really having diversity in projects and in groups. So what are the different strategies we can use to really have intersectorial approach? And also, what can we do to have a better fruitful relationship between the Global South and the Global North in not only the GPAI, for instance, but other institutions or projects, for Mila, for instance, who is more on the academic side. So these are my two questions. So who wants to start? Benjamin, since you were last? No?
Sure, but I'm going to go briefly. I'm curious to hear. I'm curious to hear all other people. I think so. The only thing I would say is I think that it's important to take a step back and think about the responsibility you want your organization or institution to play if you're in the global north, and embark in that conversation meaningfully. So for Mila, what things that this could mean is when you're doing the recruitment. Who are you considering? Who are you bringing into Mila? Who are you accepting? Who are you funding? But also, who are you reaching out to? And what programs are you creating that that create space for that? So, to give you an example, if you want to embark into capacity building, then put in the funds to make sure that you have a lot of interns in your organization that come from whether it's Africa, whether it's Latin America, and that are supported. And so. The only thing I would say is to make sure to actually entertain that conversation, that it's top of mind, and to be really meaningful in the role that you want to play. And to the extent that you arrive at the conclusion that you want to play a role there and that you think it's your responsibility to, in a way, to follow the money. I always say follow the money. Make sure that you've got significant money and programs that are devoted at doing it. But I'm curious of all your perspectives. But Alison, I'm curious of how Canada, we're really grateful that Canada wanted to join the panel because I think it really leads by example on this question. But I'm curious of how, you know, Canada situates itself on the discussion where, how are you, you know, in Canada, Global North, positioning yourself in that responsibility and that ecosystem more globally?
No, it's a very fair question, and I think Paolo is right to point to the statistics around GPAI participation earlier in the discussion. I think there can be no question that Global Partnership, for example, is an organization that's very global north heavy, that skews towards North America and towards Western Europe, and I think that it's critical that countries do make that outreach effort. If there's an interest in having a global conversation, to have it globally and not to only have it between Canada, the US, and the European Union. Like, it has to bring in partners that kind of go beyond that smaller community, for a number of different reasons, not least of which because, like, you're not talking globally if you're only talking between North America and Western Europe, but also because then you're missing perspectives that are absolutely critical. I mean, if you talk about something like the global AI ecosystem, not recognizing the power that the Latin American AI ecosystem brings, that the African AI ecosystem brings, the different levels of, not even the different levels of readiness or the different levels of artificial intelligence implementation, but the different approaches to artificial intelligence implementation, the different ways that different communities might view AI's role in their society, I think is critical to really reflect by bringing in a sort of wide diversity of global players. I know that for Canada, for example, we've sort of expressed that diversifying the membership of Global Partnership has been a goal of ours since our kind of starting GPAI back in 2020. I know that every time that we do have a membership round for GPAI, which is every year when we kind of, you know, allow any country to come in and apply to the community, Canada tries to work with our international partners and tries to work with our Global Affairs Canada colleagues to identify the list of countries that we want to go out and approach, to look at where are we missing, what gaps do we have from the global community, and who can we reach out to try and say, you know, you are a leader in AI, we would love to have your voice at the table, how can we get you to join this community, how can we get you to bring your perspective as well. And I think it was also really in the design of this initiative as well. When we started GPAI, we sort of had this idea of bringing in these like-minded countries who would work together and allowing each member to kind of appoint different experts who would work in the GPAI working groups. But we recognized even in the design of GPAI that we didn't want to limit those working groups just to experts that were coming from those like usual suspect or those insider group of countries. We didn't want to have a set of working groups that were talking from the countries that had appointed them to the countries that had appointed them. And it's why we put in place a self-nomination process to allow experts from countries that are not already part of GPAI to come in and demonstrate their value through the working groups as well, and to bring their perspectives to the working groups. Because we specifically wanted to ensure that if there was a country where the government wasn't interested in participating in this global partnership, doesn't mean that their experts might not be interested in participating. Doesn't mean that those experts might not have valuable perspectives that they could bring to the conversation and that they could provide to sort of help the countries that are already in GPAI, and even to kind of be published and help other countries as well. So I do think that there is not only enormous value in including voices from all different parts of the world, but I also think that it's sort of, it really does require effort on the part of that smaller community of governments who sort of see themselves as far advanced in AI, whatever you want to say. But I think it requires effort to go out and to provide a welcoming space and to provide a community that is open to participation from leaders of all different kinds and of all different levels.
Great. Eliane, you want to go next, or Paula? And I mentioned intersectional, but the word I was looking for is I have it here, intersectional. So I don't know, lost in translation.
Okay, yeah, I think you said intersectoral, and I thought you meant intersectional. Was that it? Okay, yes. Okay, yeah. So one of the things that I think, you know, it is really important is how do you do that hard work of identifying the people you don't know? Because it requires research, it requires time and effort. And, you know, the most effortless way of moving forward is, who do I already know? And so, you know, if we take the kind of old boys club model, well, you know, the same 6'2", you know, blonde, blue-eyed boys, you know. And so part of it is, how do we open the spaces to go and identify? And so, for example, in my research, when I'm doing global surveys, I'll have meetings, you know, at 5 in the morning, at, you know, 9 a.m. and then way later in the day, to make sure I get all time zones around the world. And so I can get consultations that are good for people in the Asia Pacific time, the Europe Africa time, North America, Latin America time. And so part of it is I attend a lot of meetings where it's global, but it's like, okay, it accommodates people in Europe. And so it's like, if you happen to be on that time zone, or you're going to be part of that conversation. But, how do we actually, make time? Like, I will be on conferences at 1 a.m. with, people in China. Like right now, it's 9:15, in the evening here in Montreal. But it's important for me to say, how do I get up and show up so I can be as inclusive in my work, so that the data I'm producing is as reflective of society as possible. And so I think it takes work, and it works you have to prioritize. If you don't prioritize it, it will always be an afterthought.
Paula?
Well, I'm always supportive of any initiative that considers including more voices, but not only like in paper, but doing specific things, assigning time and resources to achieve those goals. So for me, it's important that we advance this agenda with specific actions, having, of course, members from different sectors, because we usually forget that we are all involved in this in our capacity, but we all have a say in this, in general in AI development, because we are all part of the ecosystem in any way, in some way. And also for me, there are many things, and I think Benjamin was also mentioning when he in his opening remarks that, for example, this session was scheduled at the same time of the session of the committee, and those small I would say actions of lack of attention are more lack of a policy of inclusion from specific actors. So, for example, it was very hard to join. Also, the time is difficult for people that are in other geographies. So, in every event or every organization or every development, we should consider all the possibilities that we have to take into account if we want participation to be real. People in marginalized communities or from non-industrialized countries do not have resources. Participation has a cost. So you have to bear, if you really are interested in making sure that people are heard, diverse people are heard, you need to take into account that there are costs that need to be covered, and time and effort and people should be involved to make that happen. Otherwise, it won't happen. So yeah, I would say that we need these dialogues, north-south dialogues. We need intersectional dialogues. But we need to make sure that we invest time, money, and resources and people to make this possible.
I really like your expression, take all the possibilities into account. I think that's so important to really move forward. Okay, so we have a bit of time left, about 10 minutes. So I would like to open the floor for any questions, or if people from the panel want to ask a question. Oh, we have a question. Good. If you can just briefly introduce yourself, that'd be great. Thank you.
Hi, Thanks so much. I'm Rose from the UK's Office for Artificial Intelligence. First, I'd just like to say I really hope decision makers do hear this session because I think it's really important and I found the discussions really inspiring and valuable. My question was about, so Alison mentioned kind of GPAI funding partnership potential. So I was just wondering if you had a pitch that you were going to make, what would it be? And kind of a little bit more about what you really think international initiatives in this area, what is the most valuable type of avenues to explore? Thank you.
It's a very good question from a very wonderful colleague. I always hesitate around. I certainly would understand and echo the comments from others about the concerns about an important panel like this being scheduled at the same time as the GPAI Council meeting. But if Rose and I are both here in the room and talking, then I promise you that decision makers are not completely absent, at least to the extent that some of us government people have managed to make it here, which is good. I think it's a good question, Rose, about whether there's like a pitch for governments providing funding to GPAI projects. I would be very hesitant, because I'm working for a government, I would always be very hesitant to pick favorite projects or to tip my hat to a particular project that I thought was the most important or the most excellent or the most pressing. I think, with recognition of the wonderful work that's being done at the working groups that are sort of supported by the Montreal Centre of Expertise, incredible projects around data justice, around AI and climate change, around AI and drug discovery. Although I will say, perhaps a little out of turn, that when the work plan for 2023 came for countries to comment on as part of our sort of government discussions around what ought to be included in the 2023 work plan, the project that we're discussing today around real gender equality and diversity in AI was I think the only one where Canada sort of responded and said, yes, this project, we love this, please do more of this, we're very excited about it. So if I have a pitch perhaps to make for funding agreements, this might be the one that I would make it on. I do think that it's always hard from the Canadian perspective because we've sort of put funding into the Montreal Centre of Expertise, and so we haven't really had a funding partnership on another project yet. But I do think that there is a capacity for, there are mechanisms for, there's an ability for countries to start to think about adopting a GPAI project. And this is an idea that we've kind of kicked around previously internally in Canada and had conversations with partners about the idea of GPAI countries adopting a project. I think that the incredible strength and the richness of GPAI is that experts are working on a whole range of different issues, all of which have incredible value and all of which are focused on issues that are either intensely urgent or are hugely complex and require really like systemic change in order to address. And what that means is that you sort of don't want to, or maybe you can't, boil the ocean when it comes to AI. And I recognize that governments won't have time to implement every recommendation on climate change and every recommendation on drug discovery and every recommendation on data justice and every recommendation on future of work all in the same, 12-month period. With that being said, some level of focus or some level of adoption on a particular project can really demonstrate significant impacts for the government and can really help to demonstrate significant project against the recommendation that these world-leading experts are giving to us. Funding partnerships are always welcome and always wonderful. For governments to step up and to put money to the plate and to say to these researchers, the work that you're doing is valuable and we want to be able to fund it, is amazing. And for governments that don't have funding that's just available to be able to fund these projects, in-kind contributions are incredible too. Lending of expertise, allowing national AI institutes to sort of raise their hand and say, can we help? Can we offer compute power? Can we offer staff to this? Can we offer resources? Can we offer connections to other partners that might be valuable? That kind of idea and that kind of, as we say, sort of adopt a project mentality where you as a government identify what is your priority within GPAI and sort of put your resources towards that, I think has huge value and can help to amplify the impacts of these projects, because then you as a government are able to take on those recommendations, to work with experts to show what is valuable to you and what kind of advice you might need, and then to implement those within your own jurisdiction. And that sort of gives us that wonderful feedback loop that really allows us to demonstrate the value not only of GPAI, but also the enormous talent of the researchers, the work, the stakeholders that we're working with through the working groups.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yes, Alison?
So really great presentations, really important work. Also a really important angle to a lot of the work that's being done at GPAI. We should be analyzing more of this work through a gender and diversity lens. But something that was mentioned earlier, I think by all of the panelists, was that, you know, including people needs to be done in a way that's cognizant of all of the different intersectional factors that are influencing the degree to which they're, you know, welcomed into the AI ecosystem. And I guess I'm wondering where you would start from the perspective of creating a meaningful intervention in this space in terms of, I guess, what community you want to target. Is it a community that just sort of needs a final push to help them get more promoted or more engaged in the world of AI, but they already have sort of a background in this field? Or are you going to target, as Eliane mentioned, really early stage children who you can sort of anticipate they won't be given the same levels of opportunity? And how do you choose a community to start with?
Who wants to start? Oh, okay. You're far off on my screen, so I don't see you, but go ahead, Eliane.
So I think the issue of choice is don't choose, do it all. So for me, I'm like, you know, how can I educate, you know, teachers in primary and secondary schools? How do I educate children and their parents who are at those levels? How do I educate policymakers and heads of government? How do I educate ministers of finance on the importance of this? You know, so I think for me, it's like, how do you take every single opportunity you have to go about that education? And you know, one of the intersectional issues I was thinking about, it's sort of like, if you're working with Indigenous communities, how do you take a trauma-sensitive approach? How do you even know you need to take a trauma-sensitive approach? And so, you know, I earlier mentioned this Kairos blanket exercise that we did to understand, you know, what does it feel to be an Indigenous person in Canada? And so when you've been through the Kairos exercise, you understand that you're always going to have to need to have a trauma-sensitive approach and how you're going to engage, you know, with Indigenous populations. So part of it, you know, is really, I think, I say don't choose, do it all. It reminds me of the debate when, you know, HIV drugs were being made available in the global south. We're like, we want to give them to everybody. And then, you know, the global north was like, no, you're going to need to choose who in your population you're going to give access to. And so last week I was at an event that honored Mrs. Watts Cloutier, who did amazing work around Inuit women in Canada and just promoting their relationship with nature, the contaminations that were happening that were affecting breast milk and that were contaminating you know, the bodies of children. And so part of her work was really about bringing awareness to the issues that were affecting Indigenous communities environmentally. But the other thing she mentioned is, do we have the needed imagination to identify new solutions? And so this is something I said, let's not choose, let's find creative ways of engaging all levels of the population.
Someone else? I think it's the final kind of words. You want to add, Benjamin?
I can go quick, but I don't want to have the final word. So Paula, I'm gonna then give it to you. Thank you, Alison, for the question. So I agree with Eliane that we should try as much as we can not to have to choose, and I think that one of the ways to do that is kind of be very mindful of who you are as an organization. And so, you know, we at Mila have a specific set of challenges, specific communities that work better or not as well. And to make sure that the policies we put in place are to, you know, in a way we're not choosing, but we're kind of looking at the data and saying, here's where we need to shift the needle more. And then be very mindful of what it means to shift the needle for a specific community. So when you work with Indigenous communities, you can give the many bursaries you want for the master level. It's not going to change anything. You need to invest earlier in the pipeline to make sure that people are, you know, interested and feel like they belong in the field to just even go to university and then be champion with mentorship and many all the way to graduate studies. And so the approach that you will take for that community is very different than the approach that you will take for women who actually make it to university, but then, you know, the AI ecosystem is such that they don't feel welcomed. And so they leave. And so to just make sure that you're kind of looking at the community where your impact is greater, and then really kind of fine-tuning the program to make sure that it answers to the need, you know, whatever the obstacle is an obstacle that's cultural and that's situated. And I want to stop there and hear Paula.
What a responsibility. Well, I absolutely agree. I think that everyone is obliged to take the responsibility that corresponds to their level of agency and capacity. And I was saying earlier that the multi-scalar approach is useful because as an individual, you have a responsibility. As a community, as an institution, our university has the responsibility to make sure that that has the tools and the resources to receive more women and people that are not usually part of the higher education ecosystem to be part of it. As nation states, nation states also have a responsibility in making sure that regulations are enforced and investment in innovation and education. So I think international organizations, of course, so everyone needs to take the responsibility, and also each of the actors must do their job to ensure that we are actually doing something to reverse global injustice, I would say, not only local, but global injustice.
So it's not just adopt a project, but adopt a responsibility for gender equality and diversity. So just a big thank you. That was absolutely a fantastic conversation, a very important conversation, and we are just starting. So I'm looking forward to this project that we will start in 2023 for the GPAI. But apart from that project, we have to keep that conversation alive. So thank you very much all for your tips and your insights. And that's it.